Hey, what's up, people? Welcome back to the Over in 8 Minutes podcast, episode 6 of season 2. This week, I'm joined by a really interesting guest of mine. He was the exact type of guest I wanted on before I knew what the exact type of guest was. This week, I'm joined by Rugby World author, Rugby World Cup author, co-host of the Performance Analyst podcast. He's probably on fire in terms of hot rugby tweets at the moment. He's doing the rounds. He's also just a cracking bloke I've had the pleasure of chatting to just before we came live on here. Sam Larner, how are you, sir? Welcome to the pod.
I'm very nice. I'm very nice. We having over go.
That's staying in. That's making the cut.
That's staying in. Absolutely. It's so shig. The first word I've ever said. I'm very well, thank you, Sam. That was an incredibly nice introduction.
Right, thank you. It's easy to be a nice introduction when people do incredible things. So, like we've got you on. I gave you a quick brief. We like to get started with a nice little quick question. I've sacked off the original quick fires because everybody told me they were rubbish. So we're in. Now we just start off with the main two. First one, what is your favorite bit of sports memorabilia that you own?
Well, there's a couple. So I actually got a Seattle Seawolves ball a couple of weeks ago when I was over in Seattle.
Nice.
I haven't got any jerseys. I would love some. I've lined some up for if I ever kind of bump into people. But I haven't got any. But I would say if it's probably a cheesy answer, but my first coaching gig was with a youth team in London, and when I left after a couple of years because I was moving out of London, they got me a shirt with my name on and some pictures of stuff we won and team pictures and whatnot. So that is probably my favourite bit. I'm not sure if that classifies as memorabilia, but that's probably my favourite.
No, mate, it's shirt with history that you have personal attachment to. That's memorabilia in my book. And that's quite frankly a great answer as well.
Yeah, thank you.
The guest will know you're getting exclusive because at this point it's not out, but the guest will know last week's was a newspaper that the chairman of St. Mirren still had from his first game where they won the cup. So like nice. any and all questions, and even more obscure tend to be the better.
Yeah.
So question 2, following on from that, what is one bit of sports memorabilia that you don't own that you wish you did own?
Well, I think there's so it would be a jersey. I think I think as much as I love rugby, it might be my first love. It's right up there with cycling, and I would say that Geraint Thomas's yellow jersey as the first Welshman to win the Tour, that would be up there. And ideally, it would be, one of the ones from a wet stage where it's still got a bit of, flex and mud and that kind of stuff on there. I think that would be my ideal bit of memorabilia.
That is a cracking answer there. A first Tour de France jersey from a Welsh winner. Especially, I think I love what you said there about the mud as well, because I would be so much for if it wasn't for the smell and the logistics of keeping it in a glass box that would soon be filled with mold. I think everything should keep the mud and the dirt on it.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't even factored in that. Yeah, you like after about a year, it would be probably just hideous. But I'm assuming in my ideal world, you just stick it in a picture frame and it kind of stays like that.
Yeah, some vacuum sealed contraption. There'll be some company working on it. Some framing company get in touch and we will give you free promo if you can do that for some of our shirts.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there has to be.
Well, that's good. So we're going to dive in right at the deep end, Sam. I want to know, you gave a small indication there away about your older coaching career. And Sam, I want to get right into the start. If yours is staying in, mine's will stay in, so I don't even know why I'm pretending like we're going to stop. Now I've got an excuse to keep both. So I want to go right back to the start. So you gave a bit away there about your young career when you were a coach, cycling. How did you first come to find sport, or did sport find you?
Well, I'm not entirely sure. I know I was obsessed with it pretty much from being a kid. So I played football as a kid. I cycled. I played rugby, not as a really young kid, but probably from about 12. I played rugby league from like 6. So I guess you play rugby as a kid. And did a load of different kind of stuff and was always watching sport and we'd always try and go to matches and whatnot. But I was never really any good at it. So I was never any good at football. And as a kid, I was not good at rugby either. I was, I guess, decent at stuff like tennis and squash, and decent at cycling. And then I kind of gave up playing football and gave up playing rugby for a couple of years. So I've never really gone back to playing football, but I've played five-a-side and stuff as an adult. And what I found was that although I hadn't played football in like 8 years, when I first started back, just playing five-a-side at uni or just having like a kick around in the park, I was much, much better. Despite, I mean, not good, but significantly better than I was when I gave up, despite having not done it. And when I quit for playing rugby for a couple of years before I went to university, when I started back up again, I was again much better than I was when I stopped. So I don't really know how that came to be, but I think if I just started back up and was still bad, I probably wouldn't be anywhere where I am now, because I think it would have just gone away. I'd have focused on something else and probably wouldn't have had as much interest in rugby as I do now.
I think that's the same with everybody. I think as the skill graduate, you're speaking to the quiet. So I'm an older brother, and I've consistently watched my younger brothers join the sport I've played, and I, as a result, have moved off for deciding I was not as good.
Yeah.
And I couldn't stick around. So
Yeah.
you're preaching to the choir when you think, if I'm not as good, I wouldn't have stuck around. But you go back and think, I'm still all right at this.
Yeah.
So would you say your main three were sort of, so what people probably didn't know about you as much as they would about the rugby, you're quite involved in cycling and football then, is what I gather.
Well, football, not really, actually. So, I like football. I used to kind of go and watch it fairly regularly. I'll obviously like watch World Cups and whatnot. But I've got a sports group with a couple of my mates who I used to work with, and one of them was a massive Liverpool fan, one massive Arsenal, one massive Tottenham fan, and frequently they will post about some player who got signed for like £80 million. Well, after I've got no idea who they are, and I did what I think pretty much everyone does, which is played Football Manager as a kid, and still would. I haven't played for a couple of years, but still would. But cycling, yeah, that's right up there with rugby as in terms of my favourite sports. And to be honest, it's probably at points it's jumped ahead. I mean, it's like it's more. I quite like the culture of cycling, and I think rugby's changing. But certainly when I started at university, I never played for the university team, but when I started for the local club at university, I was less keen on the whole culture around it than I was about and still am about the culture around cycling.
And it's an acquired taste, is rugby culture. I think it is. I think if you're made for it, it is perfect. I cannot recommend it enough, but I can see why people find it not intimidating but off-putting as well, because it's just a boisterous atmosphere. It's a boisterous sport with a boisterous atmosphere, I think, is the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't mind. I certainly don't mind it, and I've kind of grown into it to an extent, but I don't really drink, and it's so much of it revolves around that. Certainly it used to, and I actually found that when I started playing club rugby when I was in the Fergan second team, I enjoyed it less because it was more the focus. But when I went up to the Wings team, you saw that actually it was pretty great, because a lot of people weren't there to drink; they were just there to play rugby. But like I say, I've got no objection to people enjoying themselves in whichever way. But I guess for me, the way it's moved, which is perhaps a bit further away from that, or at least not being the week in week out, you have to get drunk and have to do all this kind of stuff. That certainly helped me enjoy it more.
No, I think that's very. I'd probably say I'm along a similar ilk in that way. Getting drunk's nice, but sometimes there's Saturdays where I want to get home early.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So tell me more about the cycling upbringing then. So were you part of clubs and things like that, or was it just a pure passion sport of I like watching this and I like hitting my bike on the weekends? Or
pretty much. So I probably watched my first one. First,
I assume. Sorry to interrupt. I assume we're talking road cycling, not track cycling.
So road and mountain biking. I really like track cycling. It's a bit difficult to get into if you didn't start as a kid. But I watched the first Tour de France in probably '97 when I was 5, and then I kept watching it Well, actually, I didn't because it was on Channel 4. It was really difficult to get any coverage. Like, the one thing that probably people don't understand is that certainly if you were in the early 2000s, try and watch cycling was impossible. Basically, like unless you paid for Eurosport, you couldn't get it anywhere. So you might get like ITV coverage of the tour, certainly later than the 2000s, where you get like an hour each night, but it would be 35 minutes with all the ad breaks, and then you might get a couple of hours on the weekend of it actually live. But there was no other races, so obviously there's other things in the Tour de France, but you wouldn't get to watch any of them. So I would just read magazines every month and then watch the tour every year, and then that was it for like probably 9 or 10 years.
Wow.
And that probably strikes a chord with quite a lot of other people who were big fans but couldn't afford Eurosport. And then obviously once all the modern stuff's coming like GCN and that kind of thing, where it's fairly accessible and very cheap to watch, and you can watch everything you want. I mean, I love it. I think it's great, but you do almost feel like that old person going, if you're 12 and a cycling fan now, you just you don't know you're born with what it used to be like. But yeah, I used to ride a lot. So used to go mountain biking every Sunday, and in the summer in weeknights go around. And I joined a club briefly when I was a kid, and then did some racing, not very well, but did a bit of racing. And then when I went to university in London, obviously London's not a great place to ride a bike, and so I packed it in. And then, to be honest, I didn't really get back into it. I was a big fan of watching it still, but I didn't get back into doing it for about 8 or 9 years, when I was down in Sussex, which is a really nice place to ride a bike. So I started up again because I was just like, I was playing a bit of rugby, but I just got, I kind of just got incredibly unfit. And so started back up, and then just kept going on that really, and joined another club when I moved back up north to near Manchester, which I'm still a member of. So yeah, I haven't done any racing since, but there's a lot of kind of, my dad's a cyclist, and my brother used to be a cyclist, used to race, and his fiance is a cyclist as well. So there's quite a lot of us about who do it.
That's good. It sounds like a real community sport as well. And I really want to. You hyping onto me. I talk about motor racing a lot, and a lot of that is the same in terms of the exposure it now gets in the past couple of years. I try not to be the elitist fan, but I'm kind of like you. I'm like, oh, if you didn't watch Formula One before Drive to Survive, you don't know that much really. But at the end of the day, like you said, the growing of a sport should always be the most paramount. So if it's got more fans, then that's only a good thing.
I genuinely do think that about cycling is I love the fact that it's growing, but there's still that nagging bit in my head that I remember the days before Mark Cavendish when there was no British people who would race. I actually remember there was before the tour came to London, 2007. Cycle Sport, which sadly no longer exists, did a kind of a preview of the two stages in London. Well, one in London and one in Kent, and they picked out the British riders who might be in there, and they just didn't have enough, so they included a guy who was Italian but had lived in Reading for a couple of years, and like he was in there because otherwise it would have been like 3 or 4 people, and no one was winning anything back then. That was Cavendish raced that year, but it wasn't until the next year that he won anything. So it really was like completely unheard of as a sport, and no one was really following it. And it's fantastic that so many people do now, because it, first of all, it just makes it so much easier to watch and to follow. But yeah, it's impossible not to have that little nagging bit of going, yeah, well, I can't remember it when it was hard, and when I was kind of like one of few people who would have been able to talk to you about this. So yeah, it's impossible to get away from that. But generally, I'm very positive that it's growing like it has.
Amazing. Yeah. As long as sports are going up, I'm happy. That's all I want to see. So fitting nicely, I want to talk, and I think the cycling will really click. Like it'll send a lot of light bulbs on for the listeners here who know you but may not know your story. So the first overall topic I want to talk about is your outlook on sport, because it is very stats focused, which is very cycling eccentric. But are you a fan of American sport? I'm not just talking MLR, but your baseball's American, because your outlook on sport is very American in terms of stats focused.
Absolutely, I am. Yeah, so I'd say I'm a very big fan of the NFL. In that I kind of probably watch in the season maybe 2 or 3 games a week. Baseball, I'm a fan of. I find it very difficult to follow in the UK, just because there's 162 games in a season, and there are ways of watching it. It's quite easy to watch, but just actually trying to keep up with the storylines is really difficult. When I was over in the US recently, though, I probably went to maybe 5 games in 2 weeks. So I'm a big fan. If I lived in the US, I would be I'd be there a lot. Basketball, I've never got into. I like the idea of it, and I've tried at various points. My old boss used to be was a very good basketball player, and I asked her to explain why I should get into it, and she was very passionate about it. She made a good explanation. I thought, okay, I'm gonna give it a go, but I just couldn't really get there. And ice hockey I like, but just to the point of I play some video games and I'll watch it if it's on. But again, there's not a huge amount of it to watch over here. But yeah, I do. I think I got into those sports. Well, I guess I've got into pretty much at various points over the years. I've got into pretty much every single sport, and those ones definitely chimed because of the stats element. Although I must admit, I was never really good at maths or anything like that. It was only when I read Moneyball, which I think is like incredibly cliche as an answer, but that was kind of what started me off on this. But I read that and I was like, okay, this is fascinating, and this could be going in rugby. And obviously, people had come to that conclusion before, but that was what kicked it off. And so once I read that, then I started getting into like sabermetrics and the baseball stats. And then I had an interest in American football since I was really young. So I remember reading a book in the school library when I was probably 9 about American football, and just reading that back to back multiple times. I'd love to find that book again. I've got no recollection of who was the publisher or anything, but it was like a little tiny hardback American football book. But so that's where I started with that.
In the comments, any small American football book, people write it down, and we'll see if we can find it.
Yeah, it was probably something like Dorling Kingsley one, but this would be 99, maybe, was it?
Right.
Maybe a bit later. But yeah, it was back then. And I just got obsessed with it over that book. And then yeah, stuff like cricket as well, which I'm big into. I like the stats around that. There's a fascinating book I was reading by Neil Lehman, I think it is. I think it's Neil. I think it's Lehman. Right. But which is about stats in cricket, which is kind of along the lines of Moneyball, I guess, but a bit more wide. So yeah, lesser story. Nathan Lehman is a guy who wrote it. But yeah, so I think I've always had that take on it. I've always had that stats first approach to it.
Okay, it's so fascinating to me because as I was telling you before I came on air, I'm motorsport for rugby's the one I'm known for, but it's like the forbidden love is motorsport. Like I'll always have that on in the corner, out the corner of my eye.
Yeah,
I'm fresh off Le Mans weekend, so I'm absolutely knackered. But yeah, so I've done a 24-hour stint. I think I technically had a 3-hour involuntary nap when I couldn't keep my eyes open, but we got to there. So I'm very much a stat focused as well. Like I was telling you before you come out, you can watch a motor race via a timing screen and know what's happening without actually having to see the cars. So when I hear these stats and things, like you say, in your approach to sport and how the stats affect not only your perception of the sport, but how you choose to monitor the sport and on a macro level almost, because it fluctuates so much if you can go into such precise detail, but you can also almost determine a league purely on stats, which I find so interesting. And as we spoke, you use rugby, so I want to tell people a bit more about your job before we then take the next step. So you're currently an author for Rugby World Mag, but you're also the co-host of the Performance Analyst podcast.
Yeah.
So for my listeners that maybe haven't had the chance to listen to your podcast or seen the work you do, because would you technically say your job title is Performance Analyst or Statistical Analysis?
Yeah, I guess it varies a bit. So I guess I do freelance stuff for that would be, I guess, would classify me as a performance analyst. There's also like the recruitment analysis stuff, which is pretty much the same as performance analysis, but you're obviously looking for specific players for teams to sign. And then the journalism really was the best way of promoting that kind of stuff. Like I really like journalism. I think it's fantastic. I enjoy the stuff I do. But it was always I felt people should know more about this kind of stuff, and it felt like that was the best way of doing it rather than becoming a performance analyst full time.
Well, so I'm going to completely interject. The usual podcast situations happened of here's the order of you want your podcast to go, and within 3 questions, I'm flipping that over and ignoring it. So, in terms of when you said you do freelance recruitment analysis work, because I find this so fascinating, because this was what I would consider a dream job if I had the skill to do it, which is a club comes to you and goes, we want a winger that does this, this, and this. We need them to have this much skill. Go and find us the player, and then you have to go, here's the proof that this player does what he does. That sounds like an incredible job to have. How does that process work? So from you getting the first contact to the whole situation.
Yeah, so it's funny because rugby is much less I guess sophisticated than it might appear. So having talked to players and seeing it from the inside, you kind of think it's not that different to a decent Saturday kind of not professional, not even semi-professional, but a good club size on a Saturday who might get 200 fans out. It's not vastly different to that. And so typically what tends to happen is clubs will have performance analysts, and there will never be enough of them, and they'll always be asked to do too much. So what their jobs tend to be is very specific and not often changing that much, which tends to be why a lot of them kind of burn out and give it up after 5 to 10 years. And so what they tend to do is they will be focused on one very specific thing. And so they'll be looking at opposition defenses, opposition attack, and then looking at their own play, and then looking at training sessions and breaking them down, all this kind of stuff. But they won't often have much time to go ahead and look at recruitment analysis and look at players that they might want to bring in for the next year. So what tends to happen is that you'll get agents who will go to clubs that they think their players will be well suited for and say, we've got player X, player Y, player Z, here's what they're worth. Do you fancy them? And maybe include something about what they can offer, some stats around them, that kind of thing. But often not. Like very often that won't be in there.
Right.
And so what teams are increasingly doing is that they're asking, or they're getting people from externally to do this, or they're hiring the additional analyst and promoting the senior analyst to be the recruitment analyst or someone who they feel will be best suited for the job. So that's a long-winded little bit, but basically from the start, so you'll get a club will say, we're looking for this was a recent one I had. We're looking for the big lock who's not going to cost much money. And so then you think, okay, let's eliminate obviously everyone who's not locks, and then let's eliminate everyone who's not a big lock. So basically, if you're less than 6'4", and less than maybe 17, 18 stone, whatever that is in kilograms, then you kind of just get wiped off, and you're left with those people. Then you can just miss anyone who you think is going to be expensive. So, for example, within that category of lock, you'll get some big names, for example, you get X of F would fall into that grouping, and obviously he's not going to go, and he's not going to go for less money. So you take him out, and then you'd be left with everyone who would be a big lock. It costs about that amount of money. So then I think that's fairly lacking in skill, but then the actual skill part of it is looking at them and breaking down what they do and how good they are. And actually, this is one of the fascinating bits, is that although I obviously focus a lot on data, I do think that data is crucial, because if you don't have data, then you can't really tell anything. So we're so fallible, and we're so unable to correct the biases. So if we see someone do something amazing early in the game, it's likely that we're going to spend the rest of the game picking out the amazing things that he's doing after that point.
Right.
Whereas if we see someone do something really bad at the start, it might be that we ignore the next few good things he does, because we've gone, oh, he's the guy who misses tackles, or he's the guy who misplaces passes, or whatever it might be. And you can actually see that in the data. So I asked the question today on Twitter about whether you'd rather have a kind of a winger who's a constant 6 out of 10, who never gets too good, never gets too bad, just steady, or someone who's sometimes a 4 out of 10 and someone who's sometimes a 10 out of 10, like a boom and bust type player.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because some of the responses named players,
I did see if you name players. I thought that was a bit harsh. I was like,
yeah, exactly. I mean, it's sadly one of those things where basically either one, it almost sounds like a negative. I don't think it is. I think I often I have a lot of time for nuance. And I think that if you're the 6 out of 10 rugby player, you can that's a very good living.
I was going to say that's a professional player, isn't it? That's it. You're always going to have a job.
Yeah, exactly. No one's gonna look past you, because you can just consistently deliver. And equally, if you're someone who puts out 10 out of 10 performances, that's unbelievable. Like, if you think what a 10 out of 10 performance is, a performance that could not be improved upon, how many of them do you see a season? It's very, very few.
I was going to say, if you could guarantee prime Jonah Lomu for 4 games a season, that's still 4 games a season you're probably going to win, isn't it? So
yeah, exactly. And if you think what 4 out of 10 is it's just a bit below average, it's a bit kind of gaff. Yeah. It's like a winger who didn't really do much, which, that's not the end of the world. But you got people getting named who don't actually fit in those in those categories if you look at the stats, which is interesting, but also completely fits with what's logical. Because if you said, you got this one player, he's played 22 games this season, you've now got in your head to go back through every single one of those 22, which you probably didn't watch, and remember when he had a good game, when he had a bad game, and if he was a kind of player who just had consistently fine games, he's probably not going to stick out of your mind. And if you just happen to watch the bad games of his, but not the good games, then you're going to think he's bad. If you just happen to watch the last game, which was where he was amazing, then you're going to think he's amazing. And so you need the data to kind of say, okay, well, you think that it's a little bit nuanced, just a little bit different, and here's what the data says. But on the flip side, you can't just rely on the data. For one guy recently, I was doing some analysis for a particular player, and one of my points to him was that if you look at your statistics, there's too many games where you don't do anything productive with the ball. You kind of go missing in some of these games. And so we looked at the video to break this down, and what we found was that although those games, he wasn't hugely productive with the ball, he didn't have any opportunities. And what he was actually doing was when he got the ball, he was turning it into a positive. So, he might have got the ball just off a terrible pass that made him stop in his tracks, and instead of going backwards, he stepped in, made a yard, and went down, which doesn't really appear in the stats, or if it does appear, it appears to be a negative. But actually, that is a useful thing to have in that situation where you're not getting the opportunity. Doing something like that with the ball is a big positive. So you need the both. You need the two of them. You need the video and the data to actually combine. But then I know I've got wildly sidetracked here. But to go back to the what happens, so you'll get the players that you think deserve a shot. It might be just one, it might be a few, with a write up about why you think they're good and some stats supporting that. Maybe some video clips. I quite like to include a few video clips in there. And then essentially, in my case, often you hear kind of a month or two down the line that they're getting signed, or they've decided to go with someone else, or someone else came on the market who was a better fit, who wasn't available at the time, or they've decided to wait till next year. Or in the case of some Welsh clubs, the budgets haven't been
We've
announced.
gone bust.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the budgets have gone, and there's literally no money for even if there's great players that appear. So that's typically how it goes about.
Oh, that's so interesting. I also liked you a little bit as well. You said players almost come to you, so there's kind of like a reverse for it as well. It's a player going, "I need to prove my worth," instead of the club trying to prove a player's worth.
Yeah, so there's a lot.
So does that work through the company you work with as well, or is that people come to you on a purely freelance basis?
Yeah, so they come on a freelance basis. So basically, I have a day job which isn't any of this kind of stuff. It's in advertising, but then
Join the club.
yeah. So it's still fun, but it's not quite the same. So I do that, but then the freelance stuff is players or agents will come to me and say, we're looking for a new contract, or we're going to be moving next season. How do we, what's the best way that we can convince teams of our performances? Or sometimes it's just a player saying, how do I get better? And what does the data say about that? So that's the other side of things.
That sounds like what would be one of my favorite things that I would not class as work, but would be work. So if I could ever find a way to monetize that, that would be grand. That sounds really good fun.
It is. Like I do feel, I feel very lucky that people, like I said before we came on, I feel it's bizarre that people come to me. It's you still get the massive imposter syndrome, but which hasn't really shown any signs of going away. But it's still it is fun.
I get the same thing when people listen to this. Even before you coming on, because we were a bit delayed, I was just checking the analytics, and it still baffles me that people listen to this podcast. So I know exactly how you feel.
Yeah.
Not saying that nobody's going to listen to your episode when this goes live, but
no,
it still baffles that people do.
I agree. I think I don't think that goes away though. When you speak to people who are incredibly famous, who you look up to, they still feel the same, which is depressing. I guess it's comforting and depressing in equal ways. But it is pretty depressing.
It's so baffling. I mean, I still get excited when I get like 20 likes on a personal Instagram post. Never mind anything for the podcast page.
Yeah.
Got 20 people from school still care what I'm doing in my life. That's good to know. So
yeah, I know the feeling.
Yeah. we're all just kids in our room at the end of the day. That's all.
That's true. That is true.
God, that was a bit of a grounding sentence there. bring back the positives. So we spoke about your American stylish approach and the way the American sports almost, I'd say, facilitate themselves in kind of a way. Because it's kind of what they base a lot of their budgets on, isn't it? So
yeah,
I wrote down here for rugby specifically, but I'm scrapping that because there's more to life than rugby than some people believe. What would you like to see like European sports almost bring in from the Americans? Because I maintain that the MLR has the potential to become the biggest rugby cup in the world with adopting what everybody else around them is doing. Because for the visual watchers as well as the audio listeners, there is a New England Free Jacks top behind me. Shout out Alex and the team from season 1. Still got the shirt repping. I think the draft is not only a massive viewer spectacle in American sports, but in terms of promoting kids to stick through uni, to then go, I mean, obviously I know the bigger sports pull the kids out in like second year of uni and they finish their degrees when they're 36 or something like that. But still a degree at the end of the day, doesn't matter what year you got it. What do you think European sports should be looking to integrate from American sports in terms of stats-based performance analysis watching?
Yeah,
a nice, easy, light-hearted question there for you. Please fix European sport in the next 25 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's difficult because I think the key thing that American sports do, what they do well is that they have proper analysis where they actually are breaking down what's happening, um, and you'll have someone who speaks um, and doesn't really care whether you're keeping up. It's like it's on you to keep up. And
Mm-hmm.
so when you first start watching American football, um, you get kind of go, oh, I don't know what a blitz is. I don't know what man coverage is. I don't know what a 4-3 is. I don't know what nickel corner is. All this kind of stuff. But nowadays, you just go on Wikipedia, and if there's a sentence
Yeah.
that you don't make doesn't make sense because of one word, you'll pick it up. Or you can read a book, or you can read Twitter, or yeah, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so the expectation is he's going to talk. I, obviously, inevitably, is a he. I think that's probably changing, but they're going to talk, and you're going to just be carried along. And at some point, you're either going to understand it from the start, or you're going to be carried along, and at some point, you're going to get it. Which I think actually cricket does well, where the analysis talks about very in depth things like spin rates and seam positions and
Mm-hmm.
swing and all this kind of stuff, which probably the average viewer before they listened didn't know what they were.
Yeah.
And rather than spending time going, "Hey, seam position is this, and this is why it matters," they talk about it in a way that you think, "Okay, I'm going to have a quick look on what seam position means, and now I'll know it for next time." Whereas what frustrates me about the Six Nations, for example, is there's this idea that everyone watching is basically an idiot who, unless
I
they're
know exactly what you mean as well. I
yeah,
can picture it as well.
yeah, unless you're completely led in hand down the path, you just wouldn't have any idea what's going on, which obviously
Mm-hmm.
just isn't the case for most people. Most people, if they're watching the Six Nations, they're going to be interested enough that they're going to want to hear a bit more about what you're saying. Um, and I also think uh, that's what things like American football, when they've been on the BBC, for example, get wrong, is that they try and make it about the celebrities and about the big hits and all this kind of stuff, which might keep you interested for the game, but probably won't make you an actual fan long term because you go, okay, well, I guess a 3 hour compilation of big hits is fine, but I'm not sure I'm going to watch the second one or the third one. What you need in all these situations is to actually understand the game, because once you understand what's going on in rugby or football or cricket or whatever, the game becomes infinitely more interesting and more enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd say that to anyone: just watch watch any sport that you know nothing about. So, for example, I don't know anything about lacrosse, so
Yeah.
I could go on YouTube, I could put a lacrosse game on, I'll put it on mute, and I guarantee I won't be watching it in 15 minutes because there's nothing keeping me there, there's nothing engaging me, I don't know what's going on. Um, and that wouldn't change if they started showing me celebrities and all this kind of stuff. What I need is to understand the game, understand why players are doing what they're doing, and what's actually happening. Because once I've got that, then I'm investing in it, and I can understand it on a deeper level. So that's the main thing that I want to see is analysts talking um, about the game in a way that isn't the absolute lowest common denominator. Kind of, let's just talk in cliches. Let's absolutely just so anyone can understand no matter how hard they're trying. Like I think
Mm-hmm.
people deserve and would appreciate being led a little bit and being asked to kind of think for themselves a little bit. And you can see that in films as well. Like people think that the best way to make money on a film is to make it incredibly stupid and just blockbuster entertainment. But if you look at the films that have done well over the years, they tend to be, if not deep thinkers, then at least they're not just stupid blockbusters.
Yeah.
Stuff like The Dark Knight and the spinning top one. What's that called?
Inception.
Inception. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So like, maybe they're not the most intelligent thing in the world, but they're obviously they do the quite a little bit of thinking.
But even on your point there, you talk nicely about it's on your onus to keep up. Even the quote unquote stupid blockbusters, because now Marvel go, it's like, oh, you didn't understand this because you didn't watch our money making Disney spin offs, which is a
Yeah.
brilliant money making tactic by them. But they're still looking the same place, going, well, that's on you that you didn't keep up. We're not going to spend 20 minutes of our film explaining what happened.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. And it's the same with those big TV series that do really well. Is that they don't justify themselves every single time they're on. Like
Yeah.
if the fact is if most people are watching if they think that most people just happen across the Six Nations on the BBC and don't care at all about it, but they're just using it as entertainment for 2 hours or whatever, then surely that's also true of like when Peaky Blinders first started on the BBC. Like most people aren't there for it; it just happens to be on and they're sat down watching it, but it doesn't spend its whole time
Yeah.
leading people and appealing to the stupidest person. I don't think rugby does itself any favors. And actually, if you look at something like the Olympics, which people love, they don't spend the whole time when it's gymnastics going, "Oh, this is how a judge works, and here's a celebrity fan who's going to talk to us about for 30 seconds about why they love gymnastics." They
Mhm.
they get intelligent people who've been gymnasts before, or at least know a lot about it, and you watch people flip around and they say that was a 6.2 difficulty, and the 360 Russian spin or whatever it was great, and you think, yep, fine. I don't know, I'm happy to kind of be carried along and understand that. And if it was on more often, people would follow it as well. So I think that's what I'd like to see. I like the idea of a draft. I feel like English rugby, especially, has probably jumped too far along for that
Yeah.
now to be a conceivable strategy. But I love the idea of it. I think what the MLR needs to do is just, like you said, is kind of be its own league, and not to just follow the path of others and fall into the same pitfalls that they did. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, that's what I kind of am looking forward to and seeing how they develop.
No, I completely agree, especially on that last point about the MLR, because it's very rare where you have a gold nugget project and you have so many prime examples of not only what to do but what not to do in the vicinity, and there's so many interactions. Like, I'm pretty sure George Killebrew, the MLR commissioner, must know somebody that works in NFL head office, and just to
Yeah.
go, does this work or not, every time he has like a brainchild idea.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that's the key, because you've seen so many leagues start and fail because they try and be the
Yeah.
same thing, and some also try and be so weirdly different. Like their only selling point is that they're different to what's come before. Whereas the MLR is a functioning league first and foremost. Like it's got good teams, got good players, it's got a good spread across the country. It's in the places where people care about rugby, and that's the basis, and
Mhm.
that's what you absolutely need. But then it's on top of that, it's got all the good stuff that makes it actually unique. Um, and so I think that's where it could progress. I think when you look at something like the 100, for example, in the
Mhm.
UK, I think it obviously was a success last year, but I'm sure that was probably more to do with the fact it was on free to air TV,
Yeah,
and
I could
you
not
know,
agree more. Like,
yeah,
free to air bumps up everything. I think it's amazing so many things don't do free to air for launches of products.
yeah, yeah, and that's what the MLR did, wasn't it? At the start, they put it
Yeah.
all on Facebook, and so you could watch whatever game you wanted. Um,
It's still free now, isn't it, on the Rugby Network? Is it free on the Rugby Network? Or am I paying a subscription? I
uh,
don't know. I'm paying a subscription.
yeah, it might be free. I don't know
I think it's
actually.
free.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a slightly different one in that it's pushed through.
Yeah,
And you have to get a
yeah.
subscription, but not
You're not going
subscription.
to
You have
stumble.
to,
You're not going to stumble across it.
yeah, yeah. But still, like you say, as long as it's there for people to watch for free, it's worth it. And so I think the MLR is going to go well. I think they've had obviously this disappointing end to the season with the Giltinis and Gilgronis kind of, you know.
Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy, man. What a shame.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's. I mean, it's kind of the lack of information as well. I know they've put out some news about it, but
Yeah.
it's that's unfortunate. But to be honest, I don't think many people will care that much. I think the MLR has found a foothold, and I would be surprised if there's many British European fans who go to the US around the time that the MLR's on who aren't making a beeline for an MLR game, because I
Mhm.
mean, if they're not, they definitely should be.
No, I agree. I agree with that. So what we're talking about? We're talking about how we're solving European sports. Yeah, so we talked about the draft. We got that in terms of statistics, and so the scouting of I try not to keep bringing it back to the NFL because it's so universal. I remember when I was actually at a baseball game. I was at a Dodgers game. We managed to pick up tickets on the day, and we
Yeah.
ended up getting a seat right behind the umpire.
Oh wow.
And
Yeah.
it was so I was like everything in LA is expensive, but for some reason these tickets were like $15 because I think we booked them like an hour before.
Yeah.
What do they call kickoff? First pitch.
First pitch, I guess. Yeah.
First ceremonial. The act of throwing the first pitch.
Yes.
Yeah. And we got them, and I remember I was sat around, and there was this one. It's like talking about having a guy who knew it. There was this lovely old guy sat in front of us, me and my brother, and he said, he was like, and he obviously heard us talking, and as you can imagine, a Scottish accent travels in the heart of LA. So he was like, "You guys aren't from here. If you have any questions, let me know, and I'll try and explain." I was like, "Ah." And then I was looking around me, and there was all these people with stopwatches and clipboards. So I was tapping on the shoulder, and I was like, "Who are all these people?" And he was like, "He works for the San Francisco Giants. He works for the Cubs. He works for the Red Sox. He works for the Yankees." And there was all these guys, and they were stopwatch, like they were timing the pitch and how things like that, and writing notes on everything. And it's like, in terms of the pure analysis of how they break down players, could we see that transcend into rugby? I'm sure there probably is stuff behind the scenes, but down to the level of depth, of this guy turns his head 3 times to the right and looks at third base when he throws a fastball, whereas when he throws a whatever they call like an upriser, for example, just something that's like he looks at second base and occasionally ties his left shoe, or some extremism like that.
Well, I think it's fascinating because when I see a lot of there's been loads of I guess newer analysts on Twitter since I've been doing it, and they're all brilliant. They bring kind of newer skills into it. But sometimes, especially early on when they start, a few of them have reached out and asked me to look at stuff that they've been doing for clubs and whatnot. And what tends to happen is that you read and you go, that is absolutely fantastic, and you obviously know what you're doing. It's sensational, but you've packed in so much information that I guarantee you that the coach is going to look at that and go, yeah,
I'm not reading that.
I'm not reading that. Yeah, and part of that is that rugby's mindset is quite old, and so you will end up with a lot of coaches who are coaching at very high levels who have no interest in analysis, really. They do it because they tick a box and they have to do it, but they're not looking at scouting reports on every single player at the start of the week, and they're not really even looking at kind of tendencies of the opposition or anything like that. What they might be doing is looking at their own team and using video to point out where they went wrong, or look at the opposition and doing stuff like that, but it's very unlikely that they're doing anything more complicated than that. And what you've got to remember as well is, as much as that doesn't make sense, it does make sense that if you're a player, then someone says to you, okay, when the winger steps off his right foot, he always steps back again. Or, when the winger's in his 22, or the winger's better coming onto the ball than he is going away from it, or he drifts through the backfield, or whatever. You've got to say, well, you've got to identify that, and then you've got to remember it, and then you've got to do something about it. So, if I were a 10 and I was saying, and you see this if you go and watch a game and you stand close to the pitch, or if you watched a game during COVID when there wasn't much, obviously, crowd noise, so you could hear the players, you hear the fly half saying, run a switch, or loop, or miss, or whatever. And the defence all know what's happening, but there's a big difference between knowing what's happening and actually stopping it. So, for example, I wrote an article about the Seawolves and their kicking kind of options for Rugby World today, and they were. I spoke to Alatimu, the fly half, and he was saying that they saw that.
I love watching him play. I love watching him play. Sorry,
he's incredible, isn't he?
Bodine Waka, I love you, but I do like watching this.
Yeah, he is absolutely fascinating and very talented. But he was talking about how they identified that Houston dropped players deep quickly when Seattle were attacking in their own 22. And so they found that there was potentially space between the defensive line and the defensive backfield. So you think, okay, well that's great.
Up and
That's
under, yeah.
yeah, exactly, and that's kind of fairly immediate analysis that you can actually do something about. But then you've got to remember, well, actually, you've got to see what's ahead of you. You've got to make sure that that's actually happened, because it could be that that's what they always do, but then a winger just got lazy and was like, "Oh, our fullback will deal with that." So he's stuck in the wrong position for you. So you chip it through, and he picks it up and he scores. So you got to make sure that they're doing what you actually think they're doing, and then you've got to be able to make the kick. And even then, it's still a huge element of luck that if the kick's going to hit the ground at all, if that's what you planned, you've got to make sure that, or you just got to hope that the ball doesn't bounce in some stupid way that ends up in the opposition's hand. So I often see that where younger analysts will give so much information, and you just think to them, just go and play 5-star football, and learn everything about the person you're marking, and then immediately as soon as they get the ball, try and remember what it is that they do. Um, and it's just you can't, and so you need to. The key is to send them out there with a small amount of information, and then also repetition. So like if you're the Seawolves and you see that Houston drop back, then just repeat that in training. Set yourself up with lineouts in your own 22, play to the 10, and then the 10 sees the picture that he's going to see on Saturday, and maybe he kicks it. Maybe he kicks it deep. Maybe he passes it. Because obviously there's still loads of ways to skin that particular cat, depending on, even if you know that they drop deep, it doesn't mean you always have to kick it. But then it becomes that chess game, because if you know you can just chip it over, well, what do Houston start doing? Do they start dropping back? And if they start dropping back, do you keep kicking because you're now in your own 22 and there's a higher risk that you're going to give the ball away? So it becomes this game of chess where really at that point it's out of your hands. You've just got to hope that you've shown them enough different pictures throughout the week that they can see what's happening. But I think that analysis is both massively undervalued in that a lot of coaching staff and clubs don't fund it well enough because they don't necessarily see the value. And I say that's still the case now, even though we're for many people we're like well into this kind of data-driven era. And I see a lot of people on Twitter saying that plays too robotic because everything's being analysed, but it's not even remotely the case that we're at that stage.
No.
But it's also too highly rated in that certain people on Twitter think that you can just pick up something the opposition is doing and then target it, and it's just not that simple. Like there's very few things where you're guaranteed to get anything from it. And also, even if you spot a weakness in a line out or the line out defense or whatever, really the best thing that you're hoping for is just a gain line success, which is pretty small fry for when you consider the kind of the efforts that's gone into it.
No, I couldn't agree with you more, but especially because on your whole analysis of the Seattle breakdown, I read the article as well. And from a coaching perspective, what you told there effectively was first, like you said, first of all, you've got to notice that's what they do. Secondly, you've then got to play that style. Then you've got to acknowledge when they've caught on to the fact you're playing that style. And then you have to have a new game plan for once they start playing against that style. So,
Yeah,
like you said, you've almost have 4 game plans there already. And you,
exactly.
so it's not a case of going chalk and cheese, rinse, repeat will win the game. It's not a case of going, this guy knows nothing. We will keep doing whatever we've done every week, regardless, because the opposition have probably looked at you as well.
Exactly, and even if they do the same thing, so I think a good example would be Wales versus Georgia in the World Cup in 2019, where the first two lineouts came off, our first two tries came off lineouts, where Wales attacked the 10 kind of down the channel between the first defender and the back of the lineout, and then popped the ball inside to the winger. And both of them were tries. And I was watching this in the when I was over in Japan for working on for the World Cup website, and I was thinking, okay, that looks like something that they've targeted, because it's an unusual move to run a 10, have a 10 clash with a late wing clash. And so I look back, and Georgia played Scotland the week before, well, not the week before, but in the last warm-up game, and Georgia had set up with the hooker at the back of the line out as a defensive option, and he hadn't had the speed to be able to cover the cross, but Scotland hadn't attacked that particular area, And when you think about, like, it's like the butterfly wings. So if Scotland had attacked that particular area, Georgia would have realised it was a weakness and probably would have shored it up for the game. And so then what would have happened? Well, maybe Wales couldn't have attacked that way, but actually maybe it opens up a different attack because you've got a hooker at the back who's so interested in getting out that he's now forgotten his first job. So maybe instead of attacking that seam, you run a fake maul and then peel off and go for that. You can have the hole where the hookers would have been were they not sprinting out to cover the 10. So when you see that, you see the hooker is defending there, you think, yeah, okay, this is on. We're going to run our move where we run on the inside. But even at that point, so many things can happen. So the 10 was running kind of on the inside shoulder of the Georgian 10. But what happens if the Georgian 10 just thinks that the hooker's his inside man and so lets him go through? Or what happens if the hooker actually can get off the line out quick enough and so blocks that option? So you can identify these things and you can see them and you can give your team a head start and give them a push forwards, but it's not guaranteed that there's going to be success at the end of it. But it's also the fact that any two teams playing each other, even Wales versus Georgia, they're not massively mismatched. And if Wales got 2 early red cards, Georgia could have won that game. And if Wales just came out playing absolutely rubbish and Georgia were really good, Georgia could have won that game. So it's about those fine margins, but it is a game where it's very fine margins, and so it makes sense to try and exploit, a 2% improvement.
And on the fine margin, there's a thing, and you'll appreciate this as the cycling background as well. I think it might have been it was either Team Sky's coach or it was Team Britain's coach at the Olympics for the track cycling said, I'm never going to find that one thing that makes us 10 seconds faster, but I will find 10 things that make us 1 second faster. So I might as well spend my time looking for them instead of going for this miracle of, I think he used some extremism, a bit funny. He said something like, well, I'm trying to find the way around the rules to strap rockets to the backs of my cyclists. I'll try and find the other stuff that works.
Exactly. And I think that's the key stuff, is that people, and this is what I kind of mean with the it's both overrated and underrated, is that people think that there might be one magic thing where you look at them and go, oh, we unlock this team by doing X, which isn't the case. But they forget that you can go, well, if we do a bit of this, we do a bit of that, we plan in the week for this inevitability, then it can give you that small little advantage. And certainly, I think the biggest advantage is probably with player recruitment, because ultimately, once you've got a player, if he's 28, you're probably not going to be improving him that much. You might be making him a little bit better. You might be stopping him from, decreasing in ability, but realistically, you're not going to be improving him vastly. And so, what you've got to hope is that you pick the right person who fits your style, who works there. And so, I think that's where we underrate the impact of analysis, because that is potentially huge if you're the team and you pick up the right players.
Wow. No, I couldn't agree more. And you've convinced me. If I ever own a rugby team, they'll be going, oh, we need to spend money on this player. I'll be like, scrap that. We're getting four recruitment analysis. And then
hopefully, I mean, it'd be great to get more recruitment analysis in the game.
Well, I know exactly who I'm calling. And speaking of that, there was actually a segment in that I think goes nicely here. So, Sam, the reason that you came to my attention and how stuff like this started was your tweets started doing the rounds on rugby Twitter, and they were starting to bridge across. And then, as we've been discussing forward, I saw how these could branch into other sports. In terms of when you said how, I kind of labeled the section as free agent signings, but it's not really that. So the first tweet yours that did the round was, here's the list of people that do not have a contract, and there is no reason on God, other deities are available, Green's Earth, why they should not have a club. How do you genuinely believe a team could build a title-winning team off of like free agent Moneyball type players?
No, sadly.
All right, sack that
then. So I think the problem is that everyone on that list, I genuinely believe should be part of the club. and should be professional in one of the top leagues or Pro D2, which obviously second French league.
That's better than most pro leagues in other countries. Is
Exactly,
Pro
yeah,
D2.
yeah. So they should be up there. However, the fact is, if you look at Moneyball as an example, the reason why the Oakland A's had to do what they did was because they had no cash, and so no team would and no team should try and build a team based purely on those kind of Moneyball principles. Because what you should do if you're in a team with loads of cash is you should wait for someone cheaper but more intelligent to find the advantage, and then you continue your big advantage of being incredibly wealthy, and then in 2 years, once they prove the advantage works, you just steal it off them because you can see what they're doing. So that's essentially what happened with Moneyball, is that the Oakland A's had a couple of years where they had this big advantage, or not big advantage, but they had an advantage by being more intelligent. But they still couldn't beat the Yankees because the Yankees had, twice and a bit more money than they did. And so all the Yankees did was they said, okay, you're picking that player because he's undervalued, whereas I'm happy paying twice the value of this player because he's already better than yours. And that's kind of it with rugby. Whereas if you look at it, like, for example, Morgan Ames, the lock from Bay, was he Bayonne? I forget where he was now. Or the lack, maybe the one that I suggested, kind of the big four, like Viking style big lock.
Okay.
He would be he's a great pickup. Like I bet he would go cheap. He's still young. He's got experience in Pro G2. Like he's a very good player. He's quick. He's everything that you'd look for in a lock. And pretty much every team in professional rugby should be looking at him to pick him up. However, if Evan Exabeth is available, you should pick him up because he is better. And so that's where the advantage of just having a ton of cash comes in, is that you don't need to kind of scrabble around trying to find bargains. You just chuck money at the problem and hope it works. And actually, going back to just something like Team Sky and now Ineos, is that a lot was made of the marginal gains. And I 100% think that was happening. I think that they were getting big gains, or not, they were getting marginal gains from those things they were doing, from having their own mattresses and all the kind of cleaning stuff that went into it, and all those kind of little fine margins. But undeniably, the biggest margin they had was being exceptionally wealthy and being able to pick up the best climber in the world, and then pay the best supporting climber for him, and then pay the best supporting flat rider. And that was what the biggest game was. They weren't winning because of the marginal gains. They might be winning by more, but they were winning because they had a huge amount of cash that they were willing to throw at the problem. And you see that with that with Leinster, like a team like Newcastle, for example, who don't have as much cash. The best way for them to compete with Leinster is not to try and get the same players as Leinster and try and play the same game plan. It's to find those hidden gems. But if you're Leinster, just go and sign whoever you want, really. And
South Africans.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. And same with the French teams. Like, if you're the small one, go and try and find the hidden gems. But if you're Toulon, clearly the best thing they did was sign Habana, sign Wilkinson, sign whoever those that they had when they won the Heineken Cup. So
I find that so interesting that there is still such this advocate for these free agent signings, and they're almost like a, would you say they're kind of not a plug a gap, because nobody's a plug a gap in a pro rugby team. Like, it's like when people are like, oh, he's shit, and I was like, I wish I was good enough to be considered shit at pro rugby. Like, sort of things. But they're kind of, you still need them in a team. Even you said, like, the financially wealthy ones still want these club players that will stick around for cheaper than superstars and go, we know we can give you an eighth of what we're giving that guy, and you'll stick here for 10 years, and we never have to worry about having a sub 12 ever again, because we know you're going to do the job in the LV Cup and then do it when the internationals go away.
Exactly. I actually think that that obviously even super rich teams don't have a bottomless pit of money, and at some point they become like the cheaper teams because they're going, well, we need to maximize our investment, so who's the cheapest but best person we can buy. It just happens that that's not their starter, that's their third choice or fourth choice, whereas for the cheap team, that's the starter that they try and pick up. So definitely that everyone on that list, I think, well, maybe not everyone on that list, a lot of people on that list I would look at if I were, Leicester or Saracens, or Leinster, because why wouldn't you want to pick up someone who was really good, who was also cheap? And if you look at some of the best signings of the over the seasons, it's not often that someone is signed who is who on a massive price tag who's worth their money. So there are good, there are obviously good players, and you look at someone like Finn Russell who went to Racing, who was still is very good and worth the money probably that they're paying him. But you also get with loads of people who are incredibly expensive, who aren't really delivering. Whereas the people that the players that people love are those cheap ones who are there all the time, who fill a gap, who are successful, who are good players. And so when you look on like club forums, for example, very rarely are they praising the expensive guys. They're praising the second string lock who stepped up that season and is now a starter, because ultimately that's kind of who we all want to get.
That people love a homegrown story as well. Nothing does well like a homegrown story. So
Yeah, exactly.
So I want to brief on nicely now. So we discussed that your official unofficial role, if we had to pin you to a thing, would be recruitment performance analyst. Even though
Yeah.
you have so many hats and you do incredible jobs at all of them in terms of authors. Want to go back into the job description. How do you go about becoming a recruitment analyst? Because, like I said, even I find it, because in my free time I sit and watch rugby and effectively analyze players, not to the in-depth description of a person paid for it, but effectively every sports fan is a fundamental, very bare minimum level recruitment and performance analyst.
Yeah.
So how do you go about becoming a performance analyst? Like, is there a set quota? Is there a here's the list of LinkedIn skills that you have to present in a really toss potty way to get noticed on LinkedIn?
Yeah, it's difficult. So the problem is, in a lot of ways, the problem is that there's not enough of that. So if you look at something like baseball, for example, there's a great website called Fangraphs, which is a baseball stats website, and a load of people from there have since been hired by clubs, because what they do is they go, here's what I think, and here's the data to back it up, and they haven't really got an agenda. For example, that someone will say, I want to write about why this picture is now better because they have added a curveball that they didn't have last season. Here's the analysis, and here's all the stats, and here's video, and here's graphs showing speed of pitch and spin rate and all this kind of stuff. And so they write about that kind of stuff, and then people read it or don't read it, and clubs are going, well, that's quite interesting. We didn't know about that, and how is this person finding stuff that we didn't know about? And then over time they get hired when they write enough of this
God,
interesting stuff.
that must be quite hot under the collar for their actual recruit, their performance analysts when they see something like that. Why
Yeah,
did we
well,
not know about
exactly.
that? Oh shit!
Yeah, and to be honest, I think the same thing is starting to happen in rugby. So that's kind of what happened for me, is that I wrote about stuff and did this data analysis and looked at stuff in I guess a unique and way that I'd not seen before, but I'd seen in other sports. And then you start to get people following you, and then you start to get people asking you for your opinion on stuff, and then you realise that actually clubs aren't really doing this too much in the background, and then you can kind of turn that into something, potentially to be monetized or to jump into that job if that's what you'd like to do. But it's very interesting because when I've gone to schools on various points, because I know teachers or kind of people who run schools, and talk to them about journalism, and the first thing I always say is that if you want to do it, just start writing. Like just today, start a blog or start a YouTube channel or whatever. Just start writing stuff and start presenting and start doing the job that you want to do. Because for years I wrote a cycling blog that got no one reading it, and
I did see that in your sort of biopic for the Rugby World Mag here.
yeah, exactly. No one made it, no one cared, and understandably, I didn't really offer anything that they hadn't already seen. And then eventually, one article went vaguely viral, kind of 1,000 readers for it, and then I just interviewed people but said to them, I get about 30,000 readers a month, which wasn't true, but I thought, well, 1,000 a day is basically extrapolates to 30,000.
I'm writing a note.
Yeah,
Extrapolate by 30, and that is your monthly reader.
exactly. Yeah, take the day that's had the most, and then go from that. And so I did that, and they obviously were keen, and they kind of, I mean, never got to that number, but they were, it grew because they were on it, and I was speaking to people. And what it does is when you're ready to actually do something more professional, you can show them that you've done all that. And so it's like that Chinese proverb or Japanese proverb or Italian proverb, whatever it is, about that the best time to plant a tree was 30 years ago, and the next best time is now. Like if you sat there thinking, oh, I really want to do some analysis, or I want to become an analyst, or I want to become an author, or whatever it is, then you've got two options. You've got three options. You either work out a way of going back in time 10 years ago and starting it, and because I reckon if I could take the stuff I know and the skills I've got now and go back 15 years, you could become famous off that because
Yeah.
people just didn't know any of that kind of stuff. And if I took it forward 15 years, I would be a complete idiot because I wouldn't know anything about what the modern day analyst is doing 15 years from now. But just start doing something, or just sit there and keep moaning or keep saying that you want to do it. But and that's fine, like absolutely fine. There's loads of stuff I've said, I wish I could do that, and then just never followed up with. But if you do want to do it, then just give it a go and write something. Start a blog or start a YouTube channel and just go. Because if you look at someone like Squid Rugby, that's basically
I
what he
was
did.
thinking Squidge is the perfect example. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he just started something, and it's all worked out really, and it's worked out because he knows what he's doing, and he's got passion for it, and he's got skill, but he's just plugged away at something for a long time before he got to now, and I think that's what the problem is a lot of people see now and go, oh well, I just want to be there, and don't see that it's actually quite frustrating for a long time. You might have 1,000 followers on Twitter and go, this is great, but then you realise that no one's really reading your stuff, and you'll post something you think is absolutely fascinating that no one cares about, and over the time you just keep chipping away, and it'll come. And also you need luck, and you need people kind of supporting you, but yeah, eventually it will come if you're good at it and you keep persisting.
I take a lot of I don't take a lot of, I share a lot of, I resonate with that a lot. We'll get the right word eventually. It's a good thing I decided to do a talking podcast and not a blog. That's much better. Yeah, I resonate with that a lot because I was like that a lot for myself. I thought when I did this, it's a complete sidetrack that people don't really get. But so when I first started doing this, I think I sat on the first episode. Ironically, I sat on the first episode for so long. Callum Circa, who I had the first episode recorded with, had a whole episode with him talking about his time at Wasps. He then got released by Wasps and moved to Cornish Pirates. So I spent so long sat on it worrying about it that I had to end up recording a new episode with him because I just went, well, I can't have my friend get released from a club and then broadcast 2 hours of him talking about how much he's enjoyed his time at Wasps. So
Yeah,
I then had to start, and I remember I produced the first one, and then there's a roundabout story to this at the end. Don't worry, listeners, we'll get there eventually. And I remember producing the first one with George Taylor, and I remember watching the one back with George, and I owe George Taylor about 2 cases of beer in terms of pints I owe him at a pub, because I asked him so many shit questions because I was so nervous, and worrying about what the perception of me in this podcast was going to be. That I basically did what I didn't want to happen on the media stage, which was asking really dull questions that had a media trained answer response.
Yeah.
So then when everybody came back to me and went, "Oh, that podcast wasn't great. This wasn't good. That wasn't," I was like, "Yeah," but at the same time, the weight of stress that went off my shoulders when I eventually just did the thing I wanted to do was unbelievable. And I eventually just put it out there, and I went, "Okay, well, I've now learned more from the fact that that was terrible, and I've put it out there than I ever have from just sitting there watching it every day, going, oh, this is so bad. I'm so nervous. This is so bad." So I promise myself is I will get George back on one day. We will do a proper podcast.
Yeah, I completely agree that it's the amount of stuff that I don't often go back and re-look at stuff, but when I have, I've kind of gone, "Oh, I didn't understand that really," and I've written about something there when I've jumped to a conclusion that isn't heralded or doesn't actually fit. And you think, well, the best thing is you gave it a crack, and you're only now looking back going, oh, that was embarrassing, oh, that wasn't very good. But it's far worse to be the person going, the person standing on the edge who's never giving it a go, who's saying, "Oh, that's rubbish." It's one of the things that I get frustrated about on Twitter quite a bit is that you'll post something about something about analysis or something about a player or whatever, and someone will go, "Why don't you do this thing, or why don't you just do that instead, or that's not very interesting. You should look at this." And I always just think, "Well, just do it then. Go on."
Yeah.
Like
I'm busy. You
easy
do
enough.
it. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm doing this thing. You do it.
Yeah, I'm not the only person who can do this. Like, go and have a crack.
Let me introduce you to Microsoft Excel. You can make great spreadsheets on this thing.
Exactly. Yeah. You can record your video off your TV on your phone and break down something. Like, go ahead. That'd be great. Because I think that similar to actually to full circle in terms of cycling being unwatchable when I was young. Like, I love the fact that there's loads of analysis going on Twitter now because it certainly does feed into the I don't know what I'm doing type thing when you see some of the brilliant people on Twitter, but you learn something all the time and it's incredibly entertaining. I'm very glad that there's people like that in the world, because the reason I got into this is because I wanted to know more about it, and so the fact that there's loads of people who know more about it now, who are educating me and showing me what's what is fantastic.
No, I couldn't agree. And especially I love the competition aspect of almost life. And then like you said, so you talk about how there's more recruitment analysis and stuff and performance analysis. And like you said, it's almost made you step up your game. Because I remember having another podcast where I'm actually about to shout out Bruce Aitchison and the Happiness Is podcast. Yeah. People are going to get I'm going to have to start putting hashtag ad at the bottom for Bruce because people think he's got a deal. So I remember because me, him, and the producer of both our podcasts, Sean Phelan, are all in a group chat on WhatsApp. And we were just, I said WhatsApp, weirdly there, WhatsApp. We were discussing about how podcast is becoming a very saturated, almost sort of media now. Lockdown was the king of podcasts because everybody had a computer and a webcam. And somebody went, "Why have you chosen to do such a saturated thing?" Or why do you choose something that has so much competition? And it's like you said, it's like all it does is improve my knowledge of what to do, give me more ideas, and it also encourages me to have to raise my quality of podcast. Like I can't just go, "Oh, Sam, what's your favorite color? Sam, it's really cool that you did this tweet." Like you have to almost go into a depth and have 3 podcasts ready for one.
Yeah.
To go, I need to produce a good hour, 20 minutes, 80 minutes of content.
Yeah.
So I think it only increases for everyone because then the listener gets a better podcast as well. So
absolutely, and you need to be kind of proud of what you've done. And if you've done something and you think that's good, I'm pleased I did that, and then someone else does something better, sometimes you just go, well, they're better. Like I think
exactly. There's nothing wrong with getting beat by a good team, so why would you?
Exactly, yeah, and that's definitely one of the things I've realized growing up, which when I was young, every time my team lost, it was down to the refereeing, it was down to the opposition cheating and whatnot. And
I still blame Craig Bear every day of my life for World Cup. So
oh god, yeah, yeah, understandable. I think with
sorry, Craig, please come on the podcast.
That'd be good. I'd be good to have him on here. when I go to stadiums and you got grown men kind of moaning at the ref, and you just think sometimes you just got to go. They played well. Like
Yeah.
when the opposition scores a great try, I used to be moaning and whatnot, and I see people doing it now. I just often turn to my dad if he's there and just be like, "That was good, wasn't it?" Like,
That was good. Yeah.
what else you meant to say? Like they just got a really good try, sadly. Which also comes across on Twitter. Like I'm Welsh, but if I say anything nice about England, I inevitably get piled on by Welsh people who
You're
call
a
me English.
traitor to your country.
Exactly. Well, most of them don't even know that I'm Welsh, so they just leap on. Or like if I say
Yes, I
anything,
have an exclusive.
yeah. So it's just like it is ridiculous. You're just thinking, well, that try was good, whether it was scored by someone from England or someone from Wales or God forbid someone from Scotland. Like that was
Hey,
that
hey,
was a good try.
hey.
When you score one, you'll understand. But it was
Look, I'm in control of the edit here. That's getting cut.
Quite right. I respect that.
No, I'll keep it in. You can have one. You came on the pod. You can have one cheap shot. This sets us up nicely for this is about to go in terms of us disagreeing. So the big question when I like to do a little sort of straw poll with people I know. There's insider tip. There's about 7 or 8 people that know who's coming on the podcast before it goes out, and I always give them the question. I'm going, if you were talking to this person, what questions would you ask them to get a good feedback? And every single one of them hit me with going, but data doesn't tell everything. You've still got to see them with their eyes, which you did stumble upon a bit quickly right at the start, but that was an hour ago. So I think the listeners might have forgot. So we're good. The eyes versus the stats debate. There is always that it factor of, I want to see that guy play with my own eyes, or I have seen him play with my own eyes. I don't care if your stats tell me he's a 4 out of 10 winger week in, week out. I know he's a game changer.
Yeah.
So we're going to start off. Is that a true debate, or is that people trying to defend themselves?
Yeah, I think sadly for the controversy level of this, your mates are absolutely right. Like it's the thing with
please
stats,
join us next week for episode 7 of the
the thing with stats are that they don't tell us everything, and anyone who thinks that they do it is delusional. So, for example, if you believe that possession, if you look at possession stats and you plotted teams based on how much possession they have, you would get incredibly skewed. Yeah, and you went, well, that the top team are the best and the bottom team are the worst. You would get almost exactly the inverse of the league, because Saracens and Leicester, they're two of the lowest possession teams in the league. X are one of the top possession teams in the league. And so you kind of see that actually really it's basically doesn't tell us anything really that. And so what often happens in this debate is that people say something like, "Oh, meters gained is completely pointless. It's a useless stat." And you think, well, it's not a completely useless stat. It's got value in if it's used correctly. And it's like any stat is essentially useless unless it's put into some kind of context and used correctly. And that's what I think a lot of, there was that big debate earlier this year about how useless the Six Nations pundits were, and that actually we wanted a bit more analysis. And what a lot of people came back who weren't on the analysis side of things say was, oh, we don't want people spending 10 minutes going, X made 10 meters, Y made 52 meters, Z made 4 clean breaks. And you think, no one wants that. I mean, if I'm incredibly statsy, that's absolutely the opposite of what I want, because it just turns people off. What I want is them to take something that the stats or the video is showing and then dig into it during halftime. So, for example, you can look at stats and go, Gloucester made 30 kicks in that one half. And then you can look on the video and go, well, why are they kicking? What is it that they're getting out of this? Has it been successful? Have the opposition, they turn the kicks successfully when they have kicked them away? And that's a much more interesting debate than just going, Gloucester made 30 kicks, over to you. Like that's not interesting. But on the flip side, and just to defend stats, the kind of the
Just to keep myself in a job.
yeah, exactly. And luckily, I also, because I think you have to do a lot of the video stuff as well, because like I say, stats don't tell you everything. But yeah, on the flip side, the idea that if you know a player, if a player's good, you'll know, it just isn't true. So if you see an exceptional player, you'll know that they're exceptional, and if you see a really bad player, you'll know that they're really bad. But there exists the vast majority in this, bell curve in the
I was going to say,
middle.
it's like the extremities of a bell curve.
Yeah, exactly. You can tell those extremes, but whatever it is, 67.5%, is it? Or no, 72.5, whatever
Yeah.
sits in the middle of the bell curve, they're all the players that you're now trying to differentiate between. And you just can't do that. And it's why we all moan about the teams of the season and players of the season, all those kind of awards, because we're hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people who all watched a lot of games and disagree because maybe we support one team, or maybe we like our wingers small and value speed over power, and so we think one player is better than another. And what usually happens is, if you think a player is good, you'll see that in the stats. Like, if there's something that you value, that'll be in the stats, whether that is just as simple as try scoring, or whether it's something like work rate. If you think someone works hard, if you think someone does a load of stuff, then surely that has to appear in the stats. And if it doesn't appear in the stats, then why not?
They don't do it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like, if you think someone makes loads of tackles, then great, they'll be at the top of the tackle chart. And if they're not, then you've probably got it wrong, because they have to have been there. So it has to all work in conjunction, I think, which is the nuanced, probably slightly boring answer, but it is true.
I think it's so. I mean, I was going to play devil's advocate, but I couldn't agree with you more on that point about everything in conjunction, because I still believe the most cursed stat in the world is try scorer. Because the amount of tries you watch where it's not to just shit on wingers for an hour as a former front row club member, but the amount of wingers I've seen score a try by going stood on the touchline going, "Thank you, try," and then it's like, this guy's got 14 tries this season. It's like, that guy's moved a combined 10 meters this season.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a skill to being in the right place at the right time, but it is, well, this is one of the reasons why I try to create try equivalents, is that if you run 80 meters and dart past 5 players and make a line break, and then just as you get into the line, the fullback drifts in front of you, so you pass it off to your fly half who's running support, you get nothing.
Yeah.
You don't get like a 0.2 of a try or whatever. You get 0 tries. So if at the end of the season, if you and obviously rugby's a relatively small sample, so if you're that winger and you play 12 games, it's perfectly possible that might happen to you a few times. Or maybe you're playing a certain way where you drop deep, and so every time you get the ball, you make a great, amazing run through defenses, but ultimately get tackled and then someone else scores. That could well happen throughout a season. So someone looks at the try lists and go, "Oh, you only got 4 tries. That's not very good." Whereas your mate got 12 tries, and they forget that you did a
I've
load of
got the
other good
try
stuff.
assist or whatever it is for each of his 12 tries. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so yeah, it's there's more to it than, no one stat is going to encapsulate everything, and there's more to it than usually goals or tries.
Is there, so I've gotten like, so one of my big arguments in debate was, do you remember, I know you're not much of a football fan, do you remember the famous Newcastle goal against Norwich, not Newcastle, the Arsenal goal against Norwich, where it was about 7 or 8 different passes, and
Oh, vaguely.
and then it, like, because there was a big joke, like I think somebody put it on Pornhub and went 11 Londoners do horrible things to a Norwich football club.
Yeah.
But it was like, so everybody prayed, like, and then so it was this beautiful work movement. I think it's like 7 different people passed the ball, and obviously the only 2 stats that came out of it was this guy got the assist and this guy got the goal.
Yeah.
So if you were to read it on, and it was like, so if you read it on paper, it read 7 short passes. He passed it across the box to this guy, which if you were to play it in your head, you just saw it as some guy just passed it across the goal and the other guy hit it in.
Yeah.
So is there like a measure of stat analysis performance for the build-up play to that? to those two guys, the assist and the goal scorer, try scorer.
Yeah, so it's interesting football because basically their approach has just been to keep going backwards, really. So
Yeah.
they have assists, and then they have I forget what it's called now, but it's basically if you assist the assister, you get marked for that. And expected goals works in a similar way in that it kind of takes where you are, where you make a shot, and what the likelihood of scoring from that position is historically, and it gives you a particular expected goal for that. But you also get expected assists, which is where you move the ball to, what is the expected chance of that goal being scored from where you move the ball to, which works quite well. But then there's other things like I forget, it's a German term. I think it's packing, maybe, which is when you pass, how many defenders you take out of the game, or defensive players you take out of the game with a pass. So football's kind of working backwards like that to try and give credit for other people's involvement in the game. Rugby, it's hard because obviously in football it's relatively simple. It's still far more complicated than American sports, but you've got someone who pass the ball, and there's not then going to be a ruck where theoretically the three people who join the ruck also have a part to play in the goal. But how would you ever go about attributing a certain percentage of the goal, certain percentage of the try to three of the people who entered the ruck? Whereas in football, you've got a pass, and you can kind of go, well, okay, we beat four defenders, so we'll assign a value to that. But those things are difficult. They're very difficult, and they're not easy to get on large scale. To find in large scale, and ultimately the reason why goals and assists are so popular is because they're very easy to measure. Same in rugby. The reason why a tackle is so popular is because it's pretty easy to measure who made a tackle.
I find that so interesting in terms of how what is effectively similar stats get weight. It's kind of like I'm in a big NFT delve at the moment because I'm sick of hearing it and not knowing about it. So it's kind of like a non-fungible token in it. This thing is the same thing, but they don't equate to each other at all. This outperforms that so massively.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be honest, it's not maybe a huge value if you're a fan. Like, you might be interested in it. I certainly would be, but it's not hugely valuable. But what is hugely valuable is if you're the club and you think, well, actually, I could sign this player, but his expected goals tells me that he's potentially getting lucky and he's converting more of these opportunities. And so if I get him, I can't expect necessarily he's going to reproduce that same ability. And am I actually overpaying for them because I'm probably going to pay a premium for someone who scored a lot of goals, but expected goals tells me he's getting lucky. So maybe I'll go for someone who's going to be cheaper, who is getting unlucky, and potentially could outperform him.
There's a book I'll need to find. I assume you're familiar with the story of Brentford, and how they changed their whole.
Yeah.
I was gonna say that must be like gospel to your neck of the woods, but so I think that is so incredible. I loved what you said there about as a fan, it's not interesting, but to the club of the team you support, it is so vital, which I find really funny to go. A fan goes, I don't care about that, even though it makes my club exponentially better, more well off, could potentially lead to financial stability if we take this approach. But to the fan, it's not important in the there and now, which I find so incredible that fans don't put as much attention into it. Or is to go back to the expected goals. Do you remember guy that hosts Soccer Saturday, Jeff Stelling? It was like a year and a half. He was slating expected goal stats and things like that. And you're thinking, oh, this is telling you how the game's technically lining up.
Yeah. I mean, things like expected goals and I guess similar stuff in different sports always get slated early on, and it's just a boring cycle where someone slates something, and then it proves its value, and then it becomes in the popular domain, and then something new comes along which you think, oh well, actually you realised with the old one that you were a bit stupid slating it because now you realise how valuable it is, but they don't. They just continue slating it, and and start again with the new one. And that's the thing with a lot of stats, and what I was definitely guilty of when I was younger was just assuming this is gospel. And so if this is said, then it's true. And you should always take a healthy criticism to stuff, and you should always, you should consider whether what you're saying is accurate with hindsight and with new information, and that always should be the case. But I think there has to come a point where you can't just be blinded and critical of literally every single thing that comes in that's a bit new. Like at some point, you just have to kind of go, okay, well, these people have had hits with all the last ones, so maybe we actually trust them on this one. And yeah, I find that quite frustrating that we seem to always end up from the start.
Okay, wow, I love that. So it's kind of like almost like gambling in a way of going, just because you got it right on this many occasions, the law of averages, you're probably going to get it wrong, so we can't take that chance to then trust you. Like the evidence still needs to come every time. There's not a case
Yeah.
of this guy going like trying to figure a way to explain it, like, because I'm not a half-arsing situation. Like, I don't accuse anybody of ever half-arsing their professional job. I have worked with people in hospitality who do half-arse their job, but
Yeah.
yeah. So like, you couldn't just go, well, he kind of does the same. Player Y does kind of the same stuff Player X does, and from me doing a very basic skim through, the stats are kind of similar. Sign him, and I'm just gonna shut up shop and go for pints on a Friday, finish early. So that can't happen in the world of kind of situation.
Yeah, I think you need to keep developing, and you need to keep coming up with better development and better ways of doing stuff. And if if you just stand still, then the game doesn't get. The reason we understand the game better now is because people have put effort into actually explaining it, and digging into it and doing statistical analysis on it. And you don't need to know how that all works necessarily. I mean, it's obviously interesting if you're interested in that kind of stuff. But yeah, what I find frustrating is people who literally every single time anything even vaguely new comes up, turn their back on it as if it's somehow going to destroy the game. Whereas
Right.
ultimately, all stats are doing are they explaining a game that's already happened. So they're not gonna completely destroy the game. They're just going to help you understand what it is that's going on. So I'm in favour of them at basically all times, and that they should but they should be treated with a kind of a healthy skepticism where you try and understand what's going on. And if you think, I'm not sure this is working how you expected it to, or I don't think this is actually displaying the information you think it is, then you have to go about adjusting and making a change.
Yeah. Sweet. So you never stop learning is the base of it. It never stops learning.
Pretty much, yeah. There's always something new, and there's some new technology, and you just go ahead and have a look.
Nice. So my final point on the serious debate that turned into a very quick agreement between the two of us.
Yeah.
Highlight packages. Do we believe them, or is it a case of anybody can make something look good with a couple of flame emojis and a tricky camera angle?
Yeah, well, as someone who does have to make players look good sometimes for if the player comes and wants to get a kind of analysis done.
And name them. No, I'm kidding. I'm not gonna do that.
You can pretty much make. So I have this theory. I haven't fully worked this out, but if you have enough stats, then a cool thing you can do is you can go, this is how many players are in total. This is how many people fulfill this one stat. This is how many people fulfill this one and this second stat, and then keep going. And it's quite a good way of showing how unique a particular player is. So,
like a checklist kind of thing. Like, he does this much, he makes this many of that, he does this much of this. And...
Exactly, yeah. So you could say there are 5,000 players in the database of all the leagues I've got this year. There are 200 who have made at least 200 carries. There are 50 who have made at least 200 carries and at least 50 tackles. There are 10 who have made at least 200 carries, 50 tackles, and 7 turnovers. And then there's one who've done all of that plus kicked for 200 meters or more, say. And so you can basically find one person in a big group by just narrowing it down like that. And so yeah, essentially, if you take that same approach, you can find the highlights for someone by kind of pretending that the thing that you're really impressed by one thing that they do. So you could say, oh, actually, the key to winning games of rugby is kicking is box kicking for the certain hang time,
Right.
and then you just go, okay, yeah, and he does that. Well, there's no real evidence that's true, but he might be top of the list of something. And I kind of think that with highlight packages is that they're similar. The other thing is it's kind of the match of the dayness of rugby is that if you just watch a package of the best bits, then you completely lose any of the context of anything that's come before that. It doesn't mean that they're absolutely garbage the rest of the time, but it might be that they do 2 things a game that are amazing that you see, and not the 6 things a game that are actually a little bit subpar. Which sometimes is the Finn Russell kind of perspective. Really, is that people see him playing for Racing, don't watch the games. Obviously, it's hard to watch top 14 games in the UK, but don't see him play the games. Do see the highlights every now and then when he does something incredible. And although he's a fantastic player, I think he's absolutely brilliant. I think that people forget that he's not going to be that every single time he plays, because you're literally watching 4 minutes each week where only his best 2 things are showing. And so I kind of think that's one of the mistakes that people make is that looking at highlight package and then going, oh, I know how the player plays now. Whereas I think it's a lot more complicated than that.
I love that you chose Finn Russell there, because he is like the pivotal of what we see with our eyes tells us he's a great player, but the stats might dictate that he's actually our beloved 6 out of 10 winger. Once again, not shitting on wingers, but our beloved 6 out of 10 winger that's just fairly consistent, or the prime John Olomu, but he'll have 10 games after that where he barely touches a 4 rating out of 10.
Yeah, he is. I mean, he's brilliant. I feel slightly bad maybe for picking him, because I know that he's kind of an easy target. But yeah, he is excellent. But people see his very best bits and assume that's his benchmark, whereas it's not, and it can't be for anyone. Like, no one can be.
I was gonna say DuPont has stinkers as well, but people
absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I mean, everyone. There's no player who can live up to the 4 clips of them a year on Twitter doing something absolutely incredible. And it's also foolish to assume that they can. So if you watch someone, you'll watch one player doing an amazing kick, and you'll go, oh, they must be an amazing kicker. Whereas actually, we need more evidence to jump to that conclusion.
Yeah, you've missed the one where he shinned it, and the other one where it got caught on the helicam and went backwards or something.
Exactly, or the one that was just decent. That was just absolutely decent, which is kind of what you expect of someone who kicks. That there's going to be a spread of very good, decent, and very bad, and you can't tell from highlights whether that, to repeat it, the bell curve, whether that is shifted one way or the other, whether they're actually fairly bad, but we don't see it, or whether they're actually really good, but we just don't see enough, or whether they're just middling, which is what we obviously expect.
Wow. Sam, I cannot thank you enough for your time. I've enjoyed this so much. So there's only one thing left to do, and it's the only question I give people a bit of time for, and it is by far my favorite, especially when I get guests like yourself on, because it's with the Rugby Boys. It's a bit of a gimmick. It's whatever's in the top 40 is probably coming on in some sort of club song that has an in joke that nobody knows about.
Yeah.
So for yourself, the final question before I let you get on your way and enjoy your Monday night. Final question: big teams just won the Big Cup. I'd like to give people a description. You've managed to get yourself into the Ineos team, and you've just won the Tour de France.
Yeah.
You're now the second Welshman to wear that beautiful yellow jersey.
Yeah.
What 3 songs are you playing on the team bus, and why are you playing those 3 songs to get them ready for a night out?
So, as you say, you did give me a bit of time for this one. So I am offensively bad at music. Like, I like it. I like listening to it. I take suggestions from wherever they come as to what I should listen to. But I realise at the end of the year, when Spotify does my top, most listened to songs, and I think, oh God, I've got the music taste of like a kind of like an 18-year-old girl mixed with a kind of a 22-year-old indie boy from the early 2000s.
I think me and you've got the same Spotify at this rate.
Probably. So I thought, rather than try and think of 3 meaningful songs, I would I'm gonna pick one meaningful song and then two of just my top two of 2020 one
Absolutely.
top songs. So the one meaningful one was the one that my dad always used to play before he played rugby, which I've not really picked up on because I get there quite early, and by the time I'm on warm up, it's like an hour and 40 minutes after I was in the car, so it doesn't really the warm up song doesn't really work. But that was "Smells Like Teen Spirit" by Nirvana.
Great song.
So that would be up there. And then the top two from my top songs of last year are I'm slightly
HAIM.
embarrassed. No, it's
Oh, you said I am. Oh, I thought you said ham as in this.
oh no, sorry, no, I'm slightly embarrassed about
Okay.
these. One is "Ugly Heart" by GRL.
I've not heard that one, I must admit.
It's excellent bit of ukulele in there.
Lovely.
I'd recommend it. And then, so that's my 18-year-old girl bit. And then my 20-year-old indie boy is "This Modern Love" by Block Party.
Nice.
So
great choice.
they'd be my big three.
That's a good three, though. I mean, I've obviously not heard the middle one, but starting and end are good. And as you know, you always start off with your second best and end with the best. So the stuff in the middle is all right.
Exactly. And the middle one is incredibly catchy. So I recommend it.
Sorry. Sam, last thing we need to do, we need to tell all the listeners where they can find you to keep up with all your adventures. So Twitters, Instagrams, any websites you want to plug, now's your chance.
Yeah, well, the Twitter is @SamLStandsUp. Instagram, you can go on Whiteboard Rugby. There's quite a few bits and bobs on there. I think that's me. I don't think I've anyone else. But I mean, have a look on Rugby World for me.
Yes, check the articles. They're very, very good. I did enjoy. I think I read the Bristol Bears one earlier from April. It was April around that time. It was very good, but the way you write articles is actually very entertaining and very interesting. So I would recommend those as well.
That's very kind. Yeah. Well, do as Sam says. And that's it. Yeah, I think that's all I've got.
Amazing. Well, then all that's left to say is thank you to you guys for listening and watching again. Always a pleasure. I'm having so much fun getting season 2 out. Almost even more fun than season 1 because it was like a young kid with a new toy. Now it's as we were discussing, it's about getting good content and making it listenable. So as usual, all feedback is appreciated. Good comments, bad comments. If you're just going to be mean, at least make it funny because I'm just going to steal retweets off you that way because I've got thick skin, so I really don't care. Have a great time and we'll see you all next week for another episode. Thank you very much for watching. Bye.